Well, thank you so much for the introduction, and thanks everyone for joining this morning. I really appreciate the time. Our talk today is called Eat, Pray, Tech. It's going to be a fireside chat with me and Christine. So hopefully you'll feel super engaged and ask us questions along the way. A little bit about me first. I'm a senior product manager at SumUp. I've been here at SumUp since March 1st, so it's quite new for me, but really exciting at the same time. I'm currently focusing on the virtual wallet experience for our consumer tribe. Fun fact about me, I'm a big fan of Real Housewives reality TV series. Hope there are fans out there too. And I also love to collect wine, so that's a fun fact about me.
And hi, I'm Christine. I'm Senior Product Designer at SumUp. I've been here for over 2 years now. I'm currently focusing on payment links as well as gift cards and QR codes. For a long time, I was the only designer as well as the only woman on the team, so I'm happy that Victoria's here. And I love dogs, killing plants, and social distancing. So a little bit about SumUp, for those of you who might not be familiar with our company. SumUp is a leading mobile point of sale company based in Europe, but we're in over 33 countries and with 3 million merchants. Right now, our team is over 2,600 employees with over 60 nationalities. Our largest offices are in Berlin, Sao Paulo, and Sofia, but we have a total of 16 offices. Plus, we allow remote work, so there are a lot of opportunities there.
Yeah, so just to know a little bit more about my journey, I'm going deeper. I'm Asian American. I grew up in the DC area, went to University of Maryland, where I got my bachelor's in finance and information systems. And the right place for me at the time was to go to Wall Street to work on their fintech software. So I joined BlackRock in 2011 and moved to New York. And then I started my journey there. Then I moved to project management because I wanted more ownership. I wanted to see how things developed over time. So in 2013, I switched to project management. And then I wanted more ownership, and my mentor at the time actually suggested product management. So then I decided to try that out, and I've fallen in love with it ever since. But after 6 years on Wall Street, I decided to quit and start solo traveling. So that ended up turning into a year and a half of traveling. And then that's the first time I came to Berlin as a traveler. And then in 2018, I actually moved here for a job at Quandu. So I've been through a few startups since I moved to Berlin. I also joined Billy, a small fintech company that was less than 100 people. And then I also joined Sauce Lab, which was an American company. This was during lockdown and COVID. And recently I joined SumUp, which is really cool because it's a new experience working on mobile apps for me.
Yeah, and I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I grew up in California, and as any good Asian kid does, I went to a University of California. But unlike a good Asian kid, I didn't study engineering, which is what my parents really wanted me to do. So I settled on communications, which I can't tell you what I learned doing that. But I had the opportunity one summer to do an internship at Scholastic, the publisher in New York. And I just fell in love with New York. And it was my first time realizing that art could be a career. So I ended up going to Pratt Institute for a 2-year graphic design program in New York. So I ended up staying in New York, and I kind of fell into digital design by accident. I started with production design, and I learned UI and UX design along the way. And during this time, I actually started taking my first solo trips, and I was meeting all these people, like from Australia, those damn Australians, always traveling, and Europeans who were going for months at a time. So I decided that I would start saving money to travel. And eventually I made this a dream, similar to Victoria, which is why we called this talk Eat, Pray, Tech. I've never actually read the book or seen the movie, but you know what we mean. So along the way, I met my husband when I was traveling, and eventually I moved here to Cologne, and I worked at Trivago, which was my first experience at a truly international company, which was very eye-opening. And since then, I've joined SumUp.
Yeah, so today's chat is going to be fireside chat style, and we have our stories mapped out so that we talk about where we were, our past, and then where we are now. So in the last year with COVID and everything, and then where we will be, so our future outlook. So as I'm going along these questions and we're talking, you'll see the questions on the screen actually. So for those in the audience, we want you to type in +1 in the chat if you feel like you can relate to it. And if you want to share about your story with others, feel free to do that in the chat as well. So we're going to kick off with the first question. What does it mean to be a woman in tech for you, Christine?
Well, I would say that now it means to me that we can bring a unique perspective to a very male-dominated industry. I feel that if we're given the space, that we can bring a lot of empathy and inclusivity that might not otherwise be there. But I think that we also really need to make an effort to claim that space. But in the past, being a woman in tech, what it was a lot of not being taken seriously for me, having to negotiate harder for opportunities and raises. Yeah, like if I'm not part of the boys club, I felt like I didn't have any growth possibilities. Another thing that I had to battle was like the Asian stereotype of being quiet and polite and how people perceived me in that regard. What about you? What does it mean for you to be a woman in tech?
Yeah, I mean, I can totally relate to some of the things that you talked about. I mean, I'm a product manager, and I think by default, you're this like mini CEO of your product area. So you're in this quasi leadership role by default. But being a female product manager, you're one of the few women, if not the only woman in the room. And as an Asian American woman, I feel I'm not part of the boys club. I'm not invited by default. I was born out of it. So I feel I have to work twice as hard to prove myself. But in general, what it's like to be a female product manager, I mean, I'm dealing with microaggressions all the time. So people using gender bias adjectives to describe me that they wouldn't describe a man, right? So pushy, aggressive, sensitive, emotional, bossy. It's super frustrating, right, when people describe you as that. And the second thing is also getting feedback that I think only people would say this feedback to women, but not men. So a good example is I had a previous manager who was like, oh, you need to smile more in meetings. And I was like, that's kind of weird. And I was like, would he say that to my male colleague? And my male colleague was like, no, he never said that to me. And that same manager asked me, he's like, oh, you're too quiet in meetings. You need to speak up more. And I said, okay, I can speak up more. And then when I started speaking up more, he's like, oh, like when you don't agree with me, you're too negative. So I'm like, the only choices is I have to agree with him. And if I don't agree with him, then I come off as negative. Could it be that I'm just offering alternative views and he just didn't see it that way? So yeah, it's super frustrating just to be a woman in tech sometimes. But since I mentioned some hardships I face, like what are some hardships that you face early in your career, being a woman or even being an Asian American woman?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, I kind of fell into digital design by accident, which involved a lot of figuring things out on my own. And like the first couple places I worked at, they weren't very good at nurturing young talent. And yeah, actually, I was reminded just yesterday of this story at one of the companies. I had what I called my work brothers. There were four of us sharing at this cluster of desks. It was me and three guys, and I mean, most of the design team was men anyway, but so we were there sitting together, and I felt like even with my peers that they were always teasing, and I mean, we had a lot of banter, which was fine, but they didn't know when to stop, so that at some point I would just end up crying, and they didn't know what to do with that. But I also felt ashamed because I felt like I had to toughen up and fit this mold of what they felt like was normal. And funnily enough, like, so in this cluster, there was me, there were two white men, and then one Asian American man. And the two white men were the ones getting promoted, leaving our cluster of desks. And that was a bit frustrating. And also at the same place, there was this other guy who came in quite junior, and I was quite sick of his attitude. He had a very privileged attitude, and he could sense that he wasn't my favorite person. So he would often be like, "Why don't you like me, Christine?" And I didn't know what to say to that, and it felt like I had to like him. And it was, I feel like the workplace allowed him to have this attitude where he would always be like, "Give me five, Christine, give me five, Christine," to try to prove to himself that he could get me to high five him. And one day I was walking away from where he was sitting, and all of a sudden his arm came around me and he was like, "Give me five." And this was such a threatening gesture, and I was really shaken. And it was the time when I didn't know how to explain why I felt like that. Yeah, so I felt like just watching these people get promoted, it was very tough, and having to navigate that. What about you? Can you talk a bit about your hardships?
Yeah. I mean, thanks for sharing about that. I mean, the guy who made you give him a high five, I mean,
I didn't give it to you.
yeah, I mean, that's crossing boundaries right there, like personal,
Yeah.
professional, and just human boundaries. I mean, for
Hmm.
me, I think the first hardship I faced as a woman was just being doubted, and I felt I needed to prove myself. And I think the way that manifested is I felt like I had to be seen as one of the guys in order to be accepted.
Hmm.
And the memory I have is that when I first joined Wall Street, so every first year analyst who joins gets a second year analyst who's supposed to train you and show you the ropes. And I was the only girl out of 9 people who joined on this particular team. So the 8 other people were men. But my buddy, or my second year analyst, used to pop quiz me. So I would just be working, and he'd be like, "Okay, pop quiz time. How do you calculate the price of a 30-year treasury bond?" Which is like kind of hard to do. I mean, math is actually not my strong suit, like mental math. And so it was just super frustrating that I'm like, okay, I was literally in the middle of work and now I have to sit down and calculate the price of a 30-year treasury bond. I accepted this in the beginning, but then I realized I was like, I'm the only one getting pop quizzed. Is it something about me? Like, why am I like lacking in some area? But then I started to call him out, and I was like, "Are you only pop quizzing me because I'm the only girl on the team? Like, why aren't the 8 other people who started with me also getting pop quiz?" And then he was like, "Whoa, like, yeah, it's not that. I just felt like I need to pop quiz you." I was like, "Yeah, well, you need to do to everybody on the team, right?" So
Mm.
that's something that happened to me. But I think, yeah, it kind of led into this like self-doubt and negative self-talk that I had as a woman. I mean, I'm the daughter of Chinese Taiwanese immigrants, so being first generation in America means you have a lot of pressure to achieve the American dream. There's like this sense of perfection that you have to achieve, which is completely unreasonable and unattainable, but it feels at the time that you can do it because of the pressure of your family. And also, I think even if you're not an immigrant or from an immigrant family, perfectionism forms in families where love and approval are conditioned by performance, whether it's academic performance, athletic performance, performance as a daughter or a son or whatever. So perfection forms in a lot of people, I think. But I had this deep rooted internal belief that I wasn't good enough. And that imposter syndrome really came out. And I guess for people who don't know what imposter syndrome is, it's usually a term that says for people who believe that they're not deserving of their accomplishments, right? And so, yeah, this came out quite often in the workplace, and even sometimes it occurs in friendships, relationships, and everyday life. Um, but yeah, how did you manifest any kind of negative self talk you had as a woman in tech?
Yeah, well, as I said, there wasn't a lot of guidance in my early jobs, and something that happened, and I saw this with other young designers too, where when you kind of are always doing the same thing and feel like there are no real opportunities for growth, it's very easy to start doubting yourself. So yeah, I actually started wondering if I wanted to continue being a product designer. And yeah, when I actually started traveling, I thought, okay, well, I'm going to travel, see if I find a new place to live. Maybe I'll find a new career along the way. And I was kind of ready to give it up. Um, yeah, and just traveling, I wanted to be free. And that's kind of why early in my career, I was often a contractor, which is a great thing about being a designer, is that you can be a contractor as opposed to being on staff, which gave me the freedom. I mean, especially in America, like you get 5 vacation days a year when you first start at a company. So it was just a dream I had to be free in all senses of the word. Um, well, yeah. Well, what about you? What triggered you to do your travel?
Yeah, I mean, I can completely relate. I was going through a super hard time in New York City. And I think that led me to have like a existential crisis. I'm like, what's the meaning of life kind of feeling?
Mhm.
I actually started going to therapy, and I told my manager at the time, who was a woman, and she said, "Okay, yeah, I support you. You know, you do your therapy." And then a few months later, in a one-to-one, she says, "I noticed every Monday you're leaving the office early, and what I was leaving for was my weekly therapy session at 6 p.m. So leaving at 5:30 p.m. on Wall Street was considered leaving early, you know, so that's the
Mhm.
kind of like environment it was. And then she asked me to stop going to therapy. She was like, yeah, I think you should stop going. And I was like, do you have examples of my work that's not getting done when I'm leaving early? Like, did a client say something? Did a project get missed? Was there a deadline that I didn't complete? And she's like, no. And I was like, okay, well, where's this coming from? Is this your personal opinion as my friend? Because we were quite friendly at that time. I was like, or is this your professional opinion as my manager right now? And she's like, both. Um, so then after that, it was kind of a turning point in our relationship. And then I actually switched managers through a reorg. So I had a different manager, and then I tried again. I was just super burnt out at the time, just mental health wise. And I asked for an unpaid health sabbatical, unpaid. So I
Mhm.
was like, you don't have to pay me. I'm just asking for a break, right? Like it's Wall Street. Everyone needs a little bit of time off because, you know, 18 vacation days aren't going to cut it. Um, and then he said, his answer to that was not if you want to keep your job. And then when I said, like, I emphasized it was for my health, and he said, but you don't look sick. So then I had the epiphany then after dealing with two managers at the same company. Like, I really had to stop putting other people's needs and dreams and my job first. I really need to start putting my dreams, my health, my mental health, everything that I needed for myself first. So I think the important lesson here is we need to stop glamorizing overworking, right? Like the absence of sleep, diet, exercise, relaxation, personal time with friends and family. Like that's not something to be applauded. That's not like a trophy you take home every day, right? Like, and it's definitely not something that should be a performance metric at all. I think too many women wear their burnout as this like badge of honor or like a award that we get from men. I don't know. It really needs to change. Um, yeah. So I think that's the gist of what triggered me.
Well, so what did you do when he said you couldn't take your sabbatical?
Yeah, so I ended up buying a one-way ticket to Thailand. And like any American, I was so worried about the gap in my CV. I was like, how is this going to make me look once I, you know, take the sabbatical and come back to jobs and stuff. So I had lined up an unpaid internship. I was like, okay, I'm gonna figure this out. I had this unpaid internship in Bangkok for this little startup that does edible insects.
Mhm.
I did not I did not actually eat any edible insects in Thailand, but it would mean that I would get to work for free. I was basically a volunteer. And then the owner of the startup realized I had super good experience, like actual real work experience. I'm not just a regular backpacker that comes and volunteers. And he was like, why don't you come to Shanghai with me? We can do this accelerate program together. And you have such good experience for it. And I was like, yeah, that'd be really cool. And he's like, the only thing is like, you're not going to be paid and I can't like house you there. So you have to pay your own, you know, living fees and stuff like that. And I was like, okay, well, would I get equity out of it at least? And he's like, no, you wouldn't. And I was like, I I think it's a really cool opportunity, but I'm not getting paid. I'm not getting equity. I have to use my travel savings to help him get through this accelerate program in Shanghai. So I just had to stop myself. I was like, wait, like I just spent 6 years working through blood, sweat, and tears that I just need to go live my life now. Like I'm allowed to rest more. I am allowed to take chances in my best interest. And I'm allowed to say no instead of pacifying others and telling them yes. So I ended up not doing it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I did something for me. I was like, this is good. But yeah, what about your travels and like how did you end up, retrospecting on your career during that time?
Um, yeah, so while I was traveling, I didn't know if I wanted to continue being a designer, but I think what I really needed was I needed space and perspective to get all those outside factors away, from how I saw myself in my career. Like just getting away from the toxic environments, from toxic colleagues. So when it was time to go back to work, I was actually reinvigorated. Like I had been very jaded, but I felt some hope. I mean, I was still very guarded of myself and my well-being, but I think what the travel ended up doing for me is that my identity stopped being my job, and like myself, who I am as a person, became my identity.
Yeah, I think that's super important that your identity is not tied to your job because there's so much more to you than that. But so how did you end up in Cologne?
Yeah, so I met my husband when I was traveling. He's German, and after doing some long distance, where I was back in New York, I decided, okay, maybe I'll give it a shot because I'd always wanted to live abroad anyway. I mean, I never would have chosen Cologne to be honest, but that's how it goes. Yeah, what about you? How did you end up in Berlin?
Yeah, somewhat similar. I was traveling in Vietnam at the time, and I ended up befriending this German guy, and he said, "Yeah, if you're ever in Germany, come visit me in Hamburg." So I did decide to backpack through Europe, and I ended up visiting him. This was back in like August 2017. And when I was done with traveling, I decided to start looking for jobs, and I knew I wanted to live and work abroad, like really have the full immersion experience. So I thought of all the cities I really liked when I was traveling, and Berlin was one of the top 10. So I got the job offer from Kwandu July 2018, and then I was in Berlin, like foot off the plane September 1st, 2018. Um, so yeah, it was quite a quick decision on my part.
Amazing.
Thank you.
Well, have you noticed any differences between working in Germany and in the States?
Um, yes, I have. So I think culturally working in Germany and the States are very different. But I think so far I've seen a lot of positives. So people work, but they don't. It's like they don't live to work. They work to live here in Germany. They value their work-life balance way more, so that taking sick leave isn't considered like this major career setback for you. I mean, back in the States, working on Wall Street, I used to eat breakfast, lunch, and dinner in the office at my desk, which is
Mhm.
super sad when I think about it now. But I wouldn't even leave the office until my manager left the office because that was the kind of like fear that was instilled in me. Like any second, I could get fired for no reason. Um, and yeah, and I would work weekends, and then that culture of FaceTime it's just more pervasive in the States. But here, like first of all, it's not as easy to get fired just for no reason. And there's also this mentality that you can go to the doctor and the doctor can write you a doctor's note for burnout, for example. That's like a valid reason. And you still get
Mhm.
paid leave. So I feel really supported by the healthcare system here and just in general, the work culture that I'm part of. So yeah, if I want to take a long medical leave here, it's not like a big no-no or career setback here in Germany. But have you noticed anything for what you've experienced?
Yeah, so when I talk to friends back home and they say, "Oh, are you gonna move back to America?" Like I tell them I've gone too soft to live in the States again because, as you say, like, I mean, there's way more work-life balance. It's funny that you mentioned that you ate three times a day at your desk because when I look back on the over 4 years I've worked here, I think I've eaten a total of three times the whole time at my desk, and that's because I chose to, because I just wanted to get something done. So that's really hard to give up. And as you say, like sick leave, I remember talking to one of our colleagues, and I said, "Well, how many sick days do we get?" because in the States, like, for example, you get 5 sick days a year. And his response was, well, how can you predict how many days you'll be sick? It's just very logical. Um, but like, I mean, moving to Germany, it wasn't all just great things, obviously. Like the change actually triggered my depression, which I've been dealing with for a couple of years now. Just trying to adjust, trying to understand the culture. It's been a very hard thing, but at the same time, for example, like when I do have to take a sick leave, nobody's gonna ask. Like you're not actually allowed to ask why you're taking a sick leave. So I think that is really amazing about working here. Um, well, how has the last year been for you? I mean, like we've all been having a hard time with COVID and all of that. So how was it for you professionally and personally?
Um, yeah, it was quite hard. I mean, I think it was hard for the whole world. But yeah, last year was super hard for me. I started a new job in January, and then I got let go during the first week of lockdown, actually. So this was mid-March. So I had to seek unemployment in a foreign country, and actually, I think the job center was closed. And I don't know if anyone knows Germany. It's like you have to go there in person. You need to fill out paperwork. They need to
I
see your
hate digital
face.
things.
Yeah, they don't really have the infrastructure for digital submission for unemployment things. So I just had to figure it out and like roll with the punches. I was like, okay, if I don't get unemployment, then I have enough money to support myself. And I even questioned whether I wanted to stay in Germany. Actually, I was like, maybe this is a sign from the universe that like I'm not meant to be here. Like the time has come for me to like say goodbye, maybe if things don't work out. And I thought about it. If my visa runs out in 3 months, then really it's a sign that it's time to go. But
Mhm.
my anxiety really kicked in super badly. I was just so anxious about finding a job, about the future, and my imposter syndrome was like rocketing sky high. But I think what helped was as I was interviewing, I was doing on the spot case studies, which actually I kind of hate, but it made me realize that on the spot I knew the answers. Like I actually knew a lot about product management than I gave myself credit for, and I think that really spoke to me as okay, don't doubt yourself. Like you are killing it, and if it doesn't work out, if you get one rejection, that doesn't mean it's a whole reflection of your self-worth, right? So that's how it kind of manifested for me professionally. And then personally, like I mentioned, I was having really bad anxiety and my imposter syndrome was part of that. But I guess like everybody else, my mental health did suffer a bit since I was so far away from home. Like I had no family, no friends that like I knew when I moved here. So it made me develop a really close support system here in Berlin that I'm super grateful for. Like my colleagues, my friends, people that I met even during Corona, they really supported me. And I mean, I feel super supported, sum up right now by my colleagues, my manager, and just the overall culture. So it's good that professionally and personally, I have what I need in order to feel safe and like I have a place to go. Um, but yeah,
Mhm.
so what do you think needs to change though in order to encourage more diversity at Sum Up and program?
Well, before we get to that, let me just tell you a bit about
Yeah.
how it was for me the last year. Like I actually had a hard time with COVID because when we went into lockdown, because I think with depression, like it helps to have routines and everything was just the same and felt stagnating. And also just reading about the awful effects of COVID actually had a huge effect on my depression. And then in the summer in the States last year, the Black Lives Matter movement was going like crazy. And I mean, there was some activity here as well, which we were able to participate in. But like my husband is German, and being surrounded by Germans who just didn't understand why these issues were so deep hitting for me, that was very difficult, where I felt very isolated and not supported the way I needed to be. And actually, that culminated in me having to take 3 weeks off last summer, which again, like nobody questioned that. It was just a really great way to recharge and kind of gain perspective and turn the news off a little bit. Um, yeah, but like one of the reasons I talk so openly about my depression is that I think it's important to normalize these things also in the workplace. SumUp does a great job of supporting mental health. But also, I feel like in the last year, because of the Black Lives Matter movement, I've gained the language to be able to talk about all these experiences that we've been talking about. Like, for example, I didn't know what gaslighting was until the last year. So it's very helpful to know how to educate as well, whereas identify my own feelings. Yeah, but so with SumUp, we have a lot of support in some groups such as the Women's Circle, which I'm part of. There's also a group for mental health and pride and racial diversity, as well as neurodiversity, which I didn't know what that was until I learned about this group. So yeah, if we also have a slide showing our diversity and inclusion team, if you want to just
Yeah.
look through.
Oops. Need to go to, I was looking at the chat, so.
Yeah, the chat is very engaging right now. So
Yeah.
thanks everyone for sharing your stories. Yeah, we just wanted to show you that we actually have an entire department dedicated to diversity and inclusion, which I find very inspiring. Yeah, so just wanted to give you like the faces to this team. But moving on to your question from before, what needs to change? I think that these groups are very helpful for us, and contributing to these groups is very empowering. Like in the women's circle that I'm in, we talk about kind of getting to the root cause of why it's so hard to get women into tech, which is that girls aren't encouraged and they're not given the information when they're young enough to dream to become engineers or product managers and so on. So we talk about wanting to go into schools and talk to girls, and especially low income schools. I think that would be very, very helpful. And yeah, I think just continuing to have conversations like this, lifting other women up, like that's the best we can do. As well as, for example, something else that our team has started doing is like posting jobs for part-time work so that women with children can feel like they can apply. Because a lot of times you hear like whether it's a woman who feels underqualified or just doesn't ask for enough money, like we're always asking for less than men. So if we kind of try to tailor job ads to these people and make them think, oh, maybe I can do this, like that can make a huge difference. What do you think needs to change, Victoria?
Yeah. Before I give my answer, actually, I wanted to add to that. I heard something recently from a friend that was about how certain job advertisements, the language that we use actually speaks more to male candidates. And I didn't even know this was a thing, but apparently if you use certain adjectives in the job posting, then it actually detracts women from applying. So like, I think the example he gave me was like, yeah, if you automatically say like looking for strong leadership and I don't know, something like that, like just adjectives that normally would describe a man, then you tend to attract male candidates. And I was like, oh, I just learned something new today. But yeah, I guess to answer your question, like what needs to change, I think change starts at a micro level, and it can happen in many different levels. So I think if you're a person of power, or you're a manager with direct reports, I think it's super important to ask your direct reports, how can you help? What is it that they need? How are they doing in general? Like have a mental health check-in, see if, there are things that you can do to help them if they're a woman or a person of color. And I think people in hiring and recruiting, I mentioned the thing about adjectives that tend to attract male candidates versus female candidates, but I think also putting more safeguarding and particularly around subjective hiring measures. So I've noticed that in past companies, people will always use subjective measures like energy level, like, oh, this person has such high energy. They're such a good candidate. And I think that's super incorrect, actually. Energy level, I mean, if somebody is an extrovert versus an introvert, that means you end up hiring all extroverts, right? Mm-hmm. Or, the way someone looks, right? Judging them by, it's judging the book by its cover, or automatically assuming Ivy League versus non-Ivy League. If someone's non-Ivy League, oh, they're not as smart. That's also super subjective. So I think, yeah, if you're in a recruiting or hiring role, like put more safeguarding around these subjective measures. For for women and allies of women who are men, I mean, ask your coworkers who are women about how you can help learn about the topics that matter and educate yourself. I think that's super important. Just asking like, how can I support you as an ally? And I think that is a great opening question. And I think for myself, it's just about bringing awareness and empathy to situations that maybe my male colleagues or friends may not be aware of or even notice. Like maybe these things would never happen to them, but it would happen to me. And a funny example is on Friday, a friend told me about a female colleague of his who asked him after a meeting where I guess he got a little heated in a discussion. She asked him, "Are we good?" And he thought it was interesting that she asked him this. And he's like, "Yeah, we're good." And he said, thank you for speaking up and giving your opinion." And she seemed surprised, and I was like, when I heard this, I was like, wait, like actually, I think I understand what she's going through, and this is me bringing awareness and empathy to this, to this story that he was telling me. I told him it's likely that more often than not, his female colleague was probably told that she was not appreciated for her opinions, right? And that she had probably never been thanked before for speaking up. So it's one of those things, right? It's just bringing awareness and empathy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it looks like we're out of time. Will you say your one
I could
advice?
listen the whole day to you, ladies. Thanks so much for sharing your experience. I think it did resonate a lot with our audience because I've been writing so many amazing things. That's amazing. It's really important to talk about mental health. Thanks for sharing your experience.
Thank
So
you
they
so
were
much.
thinking and telling that it totally resonates with them, especially what you shared living in Germany. And thank you so much. I do agree with you, Victoria, that we need to learn about the topics that matter and educate ourselves. And what COVID is teaching us, and we are put in the situation where we have time to educate yourself, so we don't have an excuse anymore that we don't know something or we don't have time. Thank you so much, Christine. Thank you so much, Victoria. It was great to have you with us on this stage. Keep being the inspiration and role models for women in tech. Have a great day. Stay with us if you can. Join the session, stay in the chat, go to the network, and thank you so much. See you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Get in touch with us. Bye.